Okay,
All right.
well, here we are, all four together. I can start with a question. I've asked it before. I was in Atlanta and I gave a talk at a Unity church in North Atlanta, and I had two theologians up on the stage with me, and I asked them this question. So I'd like to ask you, Eric, and that is, can you tell me what are the fundamental attributes, the fundamental aspects, the fundamental essence, if we will, of God? What if you were describing, what is God? What would the fundamental attributes be? And the reason I ask that is because then I take that answer and I look at it in juxtaposition to what I call the larger consciousness system, and see how those two, interact. See if it's the same or similar, or what the differences are.
When I hear that question, my mind immediately goes to my cat, who died last year at the ripe old age of 23. And I have lived with that cat for 22 of the 23 years. I cannot still, to this day, claim to have known anything about the mind of my cat. I don't even know if she liked me. That cat has a mind of her own. And so for me to even speculate about what might be the nature of God when I can't even figure out what the mind of my cat seems. However, what I can speak to is my experience of this God, and then I can be a little more precise, as long as it's regarding my experience rather than what I think God to be in God's innermost self.
Okay, sure, that's fair enough.
Christians have always gotten themselves in trouble, I think, by trying to know too much about what God is in God's himself.
Yes.
But in my experience, to me, God is the one who loves me beyond my wildest imagination could conceive.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow, I still can't explain this years later, after first coming into that awareness. I cannot explain how that happens. But I do think that God is more aware of me than I am aware of me. And because of that awareness, and despite that awareness, loves me and you and all people beyond what we could possibly imagine. So as a Christian, Christians talk a lot about salvation, and I think in very inappropriate ways. To me, all salvation really means, as I understand it as a Christian, is discovering that you are loved beyond your wildest imagination and determining to orient your life around that discovery now for you and for others.
Okay, well, that matches very, very even precisely with the way I would describe, my experience of the larger consciousness system. And it's really the same, sort of thing. Basically, the system is love. And the whole point of us is to learn to become love. And that doesn't mean act loving, that means be loving. And the difference between the acting and the being, of course, is very important. And that's basically our purpose here, is to grow up and learn that it's about other, not about self. That it's, ask what you can do to help, not, what you can get. It's about, and in my lexicon, since I'm a physicist, I have a lot of techie terms that kind of go around this, but it's all basically saying the same thing. I relate the love in an information system. See, the larger conscious system is an information system, and information systems evolve by reducing their entropy. And through a set of logic, I can eventually come up with lowering entropy is equated to becoming love. That's how social systems evolve. That's how social systems create more content, more value, is by caring about each other. So in any social system, the way forward, the way to evolve is through caring about other. And caring about other is basically what love is all about. And yes...
Well, can I throw something in on
Sure.
that? least from a less Unitarian standpoint, or even less linked to the LCS as you've portrayed it in your books and lectures. But when you talk about becoming love, I think a Trinitarian Christian would complexify it more than just saying it's a monolithic love coming into being. But a Christian would argue that the incarnation of Christ is the purest expression of love made manifest in a physical material reality. So I think it seems to me like some of the purposes of theology are to fine-tune some of these things, because to say we're becoming love could lead to all kinds of maybe unintended and undesirable consequences if we don't really know what love is, right? So the incarnate, to the Christian, the incarnation is really central to even understanding love. Does that make sense?
And if I could maybe tag on to that, I think when we talk about incarnation, which actually is my sermon subject this Sunday is the incarnation, but I think that we also can get into a lot of misunderstanding. There's a wide variety of opinion within Christianity about what incarnation means. Does that mean that Jesus was literally God come to earth, or was he someone who manifested God, or through whom we see God? How does that work? Which to me are again, that get us into those questions that we think we know too much about. But I definitely agree that I think one of the things I love about the Trinitarian notion of God is that you cannot actually reduce God down to a single point. That its greatest reduction, it can only be reduced to three, which is a relational thing, and not even just simply a binary relationship. And that speaks to me about the way the life works, that everything is about a relationship. You cannot be reduced to some sort of single point, which is really, if there's love, it has to be love, as far as I can understand, can only be expressed in relationship with a beloved. So when people talk about God being love, but say that God has no awareness of us, that doesn't make sense to me. It's like, that'd be like me saying I love my wife, but I haven't seen her in the last 20 years. They say, well, really, how loving are you? And so that the relationality to me is a source of wonder.
Well, that's a little different then. That's the first differences I've heard. In my viewpoint, love really doesn't need a beloved. It just is. It's something you give. And it doesn't have to be something that you get back. It's a gift that has to be entirely unconditional. Yeah, it has to be unconditional. All love is unconditional. Otherwise, it's not love. It's something else, and it's something that you give, not something that you bargain. I'll give you this if you give me that. That's not love. That's conditional. And love is just to me, it's a sense of caring, that it's about other. It's the opposite of it. It's like the vector points toward me, the vector of my intent, then that's not love. If it points out the other, then that can be love. It has to be about other people. I'm sure in the Christian and other theologies as well, there's this experience of that love that I suspect you would call God, I would call the larger conscious system, where you indeed come eyeball to eyeball with that being, that source, and it is a kind of an overwhelming experience that you become one with all in that experience. You feel that you are a piece of everything, the trees and every blade of grass and everything. You're just one with the whole. You have this sense of total and complete love that is awesome, breathtaking experience, and that this experience, it sounds like an experience that those within a religious institution would have a similar kind of experience when they have this connection. And of course, in the East, the yogis have this connection when they reach samadhi or whatever it is, where they are at the interaction with the same kind of experience with love, and that's kind of universal in the sense it's available to everybody, and it really isn't so much in relationship. Well, I guess it is in a sense. It's a relationship of you to the source, but we're all just a piece of the source. So that relationship is kind of not one we can take up or let go of. It just is. It's just the relationship that's there. So I kind of think of love in that way. But Eric E., I agree with you about we can confuse ourselves if we go into too much detail. That just we dig down with our intellect into things, trying to get them more and more precise, and so it's easier for us to understand, and we often trip ourselves up. That the larger conscious system, it to me is a metaphor. It's just what I call it. God's another metaphor. A metaphor, something that stands for something else. And metaphors are such that they only go so deep. A metaphor isn't something that you can keep reducing down into more logical pieces. A good example I give on that, there's a metaphor of, her eyes were as blue as the deep blue sea. Okay, there's a metaphor. But if we start asking, well, what sea was that? And how deep was it? And what time of day was it when, that color came about in the sea? And we can go down and down and down and say, well, that sea could only be from, sunrise to sunset, because after that it doesn't look blue, and go through all kinds of things and descriptions and, put parameters on it. And basically all of that really doesn't matter. You've ceased to be useful, even though you can put all the specificity to it. You're missing the point of the overall metaphor. And, I have things that in religion would probably be called soul, and I call it an individuated unit of consciousness. It's another metaphor. And I have free will awareness units, which is a subset of the soul, and it's just another metaphor. We need metaphors so that we can talk to each other, so we can have language that means something to each other, and that's what the metaphor is. But if we take these metaphors and try to build a logical context underneath of them, I think that's a mistake. So I tend to keep everything just up on that high level. People says, well, talk to me about my guides, or maybe the angels, and so on. And I say, well, let's just call that your interface with Source, your interface with the larger consciousness system. No need to build up structure underneath of that and then confuse ourselves, because pretty soon we start to believe our metaphors are facts. And indeed, our metaphors are just metaphors.
Well, if I can throw something in, it seems to me that some metaphors, if we take Christianity, for example, or Islam, Buddhism, some of these metaphors have the power to create an entire civilization. And it seems like I think there'd be a lot of Christians, Muslims, Jews, and Buddhists who would bristle a little bit at hearing, well, what your people have believed in for the past 2,000 years is just a metaphor, and it's really no different from me acting up my inner being. I think just how, for one thing, I think we do need metaphors, and some of them are very powerful. I'm not sure they're all equivalent. Maybe you can speak to that. But also, on the question of becoming love, how does anyone know without an associated system of moral ethics, that what they imagine to be loving everybody or giving, for the other, isn't horribly wrong? That they have no idea that what they're doing might not be. I think we all have known people who have loved people to the point where they almost ruin their lives. So there's love. There's what I think love is, and then there's actual, objective metaphysical love from the standpoint of really lowering entropy. And I'm not sure anybody will necessarily know the difference on their own, according to their own lights.
Would there be a coming together on this if you talked about God or any of this language that we would use as instead of metaphors, signifiers?
Sure.
The word I use for God is just really a signifier for an experience that I can't really put into words at all.
Yeah, well, that's what a metaphor is. It's just a symbol. It's a thing that we attach meaning to. And the way you tell whether or not what you're feeling and what you're expressing is really love or something else that you think is love is by the results. It's a matter of, tasting the pudding. You don't know whether it's good pudding or not until you actually taste it. And if you are if you think you are a being of love and that you're trying to conduct all your business, about other and with love, but you're not sure, well, look around you and look at yourself. Look at your own feelings. Are you positive? Are you full of joy? Is your life, a wonderful thing, and you have very positive attitudes, or are you a person that gets angry, gets upset, feels annoyed, that sort of thing? And what about people in your relationships? Are your relationships, excellent and free of problems for the most part? And ask what other people think of you. Are you somebody other people want to hang out with? Well, if you get all of these signs that basically put you in a positive space as opposed to a negative space, then what you're doing, whatever the metaphor and however you call it, is probably, the right thing. And it's a good thing to be. So just look at the results of who you are and how you interact with people, and that's how you tell whether what you're doing is hurting people or helping people, no matter what metaphor you use to describe it.
The one thing that I wanted, because I kind of backing up, I think I tend to be more towards Tom in this area, but I'd like to think of it as kind of a Zen approach, in that to me, the metaphor that of God failed me at one point, and then soon thereafter, the metaphor of love failed me, because I've realized that I don't really understand either one of them. That what I would think would be love isn't necessarily what I see around me. It's that intuitive feeling. There's not really a word or even a condition. There's just something about I feel in my being that's love, and there's really no way of putting words to it.
Tom, when I'm hearing what you're saying about evidence of whether love is true, translated that in my language, that's the Apostle Paul's language. That's fruits of the Spirit, like those very things you're naming. Are you empathetic at all? Are you halfway compassionate? Are you honest? Are you do you have perseverance? All those things with you. The only caveat I would add to the list you gave is just a reminder that, like, to take somebody like Martin Luther King, for instance, who was absolutely full of love, but who was also constantly in trouble with people, and also suffered with depression at times as well, because the love he was bearing witness to was so far beyond what the kind of the smallness of a whole lot of other minds, that it put him constantly into conflict, and to even with his own people at times, his own supporters at times. So it doesn't mean that you always have a consistently happy life and that everybody will like you. So, but it may put you into deep trouble.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I wonder I was wondering if we maybe go back to revisit the love in terms of the relational part of it, though, because what I heard you was talking about was trying to search for a little bit more precision in that, and I think that is where we could be a little bit more precise about whether love requires relationship or not. Let me just float this idea past you. Well, first of all, I think at that highly mystical level where you do have, I've had a couple of road to Damascus kinds of experiences in my life that were highly mystical, and they sounded exactly like what you were describing, Tom, where it just all becomes one. Yeah. And love is very much the defining characteristic of that experience. At that point, I could no more talk about giving love than receiving love. It was simply an experience of love. And in those moments, love is both flowing through me and into me. It is both being given and received, but it's really not. It's beyond even those terms. It is experience. But for me to experience, it required me as an individual unit that is not so individual as I tend to perceive, and another, at least another that is a much higher form of consciousness than I am. So it creates at least a space between us, and something that flows between that space. And I think that Immanuel Kant, Christians started paying attention to Immanuel Kant years ago, and he talked about love being a completely unconditional, and therefore it needed to, the truest, purest love is love in where you have absolutely no self-interest involved. You simply give it to another. Mm-hmm. Now, where a lot of Christianity, and I know this very well because it especially affected us on the more liberal end of Christianity, it ended up working out into a whole lot of great works then for other people. How do we serve the poor? How do we see the needy? All those things. But what we've discovered in recent years, looking back at our own behaviors, is a lot of those loving behaviors that were so disinterested were also very patronizing. Like, I have something to give you. I can help you.
Right.
All my life is only ever in your best interest. I think that really, when we give away love, if we can't, we're always receiving something, aren't we? We're already in the giving away where we are experiencing something. So even in giving away love to others, we're experiencing benefit whether we've asked for it or not. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we are benefiting from the love that we're giving away. That they are helping us even as we are reaching out.
Well, that's that difference between the being and the acting. You see, it's really easy to confuse ourselves between those two. If we think that, okay, good deeds are a good way to go, and then we go out and do good deeds, well, that's more, I put that into the acting category, that we're doing them because we think we should. There's a difference between doing them because we think we should and doing them because that is a reflection of us and who we are. We do those good deeds because that's us at the being level. We don't, we couldn't do anything else other than those good deeds because that's just us. But if we're doing them because we think we ought to be doing them, because we think it's a good thing to do, then that is ego. That's not at the being level. That's an ego thing. And then it's not really about doing a good deed. It's about us feeling good about ourselves because we are, doing the right thing. And it's about us, really not about others. So, yeah, I agree. That's a very easy trap to fall into. It's the difference between the acting, the intellectual level where we think we're doing the right thing and the being level where we're just expressing who we are. And yes, back to that experience where you become one with everything. It's not, at least I do that. I kind of do that whenever I choose to do that. It's something, it's just available. It's a thing that you can experience that's available when you need to experience it. But you don't need to experience it very often because it's not something to do casually. It's a really very special thing. But in any case, it basically is also, not only is it a connection with Source, with something that's bigger than you, and in that way a relationship, but it's also shows you your own potential, that you indeed are yourself, the same thing as Source. You're just a piece of that Source, and you and Source together are everything. And you don't, at least I don't in that experience, really feel so much it's I'm here and Source is there, as Source and I are all one thing. And I am just it's me, and I'm a part of everything as it is everything. And it's really not so much about me and Source as different things, or even a relationship between me and Source. It's that I just become an aware part of that Source, and my awareness and the Source awareness are all the same thing at that point. And it's all just kind of love. It's one of those experiences that after you have it, you really can't talk about it, for the next 4 or 5 hours afterwards. It's not something you can express, and it's the kind of thing that it takes a day or two before you can really even, verbalize it.
Can I throw in a clarifying a question here?
Sure.
Because this is something that I've been pondering ever since getting acquainted with your works, Tom. It's kind of a reference to Zen moment. It's exactly what you just described. It's the dissolution of boundary, where the thou art that, I am thou, and there's a right. We all are aware of our essential unity. But here's a question: is that a moment of an infusion of or an awareness of pure love, or is that consciousness? Like, if you were to set some kind of an hierarchical or even causal hierarchy between love and consciousness. You've said consciousness is fundamental many, many times. But is love then a emanation of consciousness, or is love equivalent to consciousness? I mean, not to split hairs here, but if consciousness is fundamental and we're trying to become love, does love at some point become consciousness or vice versa? What's the relationship to those things?
Okay, consciousness is the source. Consciousness is the fundamental thing. And consciousness evolves, and it evolves toward states of lower entropy. Lower entropy states mean states of being love. So that's kind of the words I use. So consciousness is the fundamental thing. It's the media, if you will, and love is an expression of a low entropy consciousness. It's the expression of consciousness that has evolved past its fear, past its ego, past its beliefs. It just is, and it's love. So it's when consciousness evolves, then consciousness becomes love. So it's a process of becoming, and it's not one that you probably ever, get to the point where you're done. It's something that you work on and you become, and evolution's an open-ended process, and it just goes. And as consciousness evolves, it evolves to higher states of expressing love. So if you're a very evolved consciousness, then you become love. This larger system that we interact with is a very evolved consciousness, but it is a consciousness, which means it's aware. It thinks, it makes choices, decisions, but it isn't done. It isn't perfect. It isn't, shall I say, it's still evolving. Everything continues to evolve. If you stop working at evolving, you start de-evolving. It's one of those things. You have to continually pour effort into it, otherwise it starts to run backwards. It's not a thing you can just do, become, and then you're done. So yeah, it's the expression of an evolved consciousness. That's what love is. Because love is the thing that optimizes interactions. If you have a social system, that means things that interact with each other, then love is what optimizes those interactions. And the larger conscious system is a social system. So love is just, is what happens, is what you become as you grow up. You start expressing this love and this caring because that's what works. That's what's functional. That's what builds and constructs. Everything else tears apart and destroys. Love builds and constructs. So it's a process of making choices and learning which way is profitable and which way isn't.
Could I force us into a slightly different but very related direction?
Sure.
And I want to hear the take of all you guys on this one. Since we're not there yet, there is a gap. We're missing the mark, as the old rabbis would say. What about the problem of sin and evil, and how does this relate? Or how would you cast this from a standpoint of a my big toe quasi theology or new theology or philosophy? How do we come to grips with this problem? If everything is supposed to be love, why isn't it? Why haven't we gotten there yet?
Well, it's because in order to have consciousness, you have choice. In order to have choice, you need free will. So free will and consciousness are logically necessary for each other. You can't have one without the other. And the other thing that goes in that little triumvirate is time. You need also time for free will, because choice requires time. There's before the choice and after the choice. So time is necessary as well.
You sound like St. Augustine.
So anyway,
just like St. Augustine.
You have those. You have those things have to go together, and if you give free will, then you have to allow decisions that are toward fear rather than toward love. I mean, choices. Those are, choices. You can't say, okay, you all have free will as long as you do what I want. That's not free will. So free will allows people to be however they are. And growing up to become love takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work. It's not just something that you're just, that's your natural state. Your natural state is one of being very self-centered. And it's all about me. I get what I want and what I need. And do I have what I need and what those that I, like my family and my children, do I have what they need? And if you have to grab that from somebody else, well, that's their problem, not yours. That is kind of the attitude where we start. And from there, we have to grow up, evolve the quality of our consciousness, and become love. So it's not that sin and evil is something that was given to us. It's just that we have to become different. We have to become love. And another way of looking at this is that love is the fundamental thing. If you get rid of all that fear, ego, and belief, you are love. So it's not like you have to do something special to become love. You really just have to get rid of all the poor choices, all the negative choices. Make all your choices about other. Make them all from the being level, not from the acting, and then you are moving toward love. So it's free will is why we have all that negative junk. It's just part of the. It just goes with the game.
Scott and I have had many debates about free will. I tend to be more in your camp on free will. I don't know, Scott, do you have a different idea?
Well, yeah, no, you kind of tagged into one of the things that's kind of always been the eternal mystery for me is that, well, to sort of preface it, I sort of came upon my first step towards kind of heading towards, Tom, your point of view was when I was first introduced to the Mandelbrot set back in the late 90s. And so I've always toyed with the somewhat of the deterministic point of view, because if you zoom in on the Mandelbrot set, it appears to be random, but it's not. If you know the formula, you know how it's going to end. There's not it's basically a predetermined thing. I also have always struggled with, and that's why I say that the metaphor of love has failed me, is that I've heard you say in some of your talks that we have free will, but it's highly conditional. It's not like, I just want to fly, so I could fly. The rule set sets up my will. So I've always had a certain level of confusion that if God or whatever is quote unquote love, that you wouldn't create conditions that would make it easier to become love, because you can create the rule set however you want it to be. So why not create the rule set so that love comes much easier and less painful to us? That's always been one of mine.
Okay, well that's a good question, and I think I can answer that.
Is it good? Because we've been debating this for years, and I still haven't given the right answer.
Well, free will is not the freedom to have anything you want. It's not. It's not free will. Is not a genie, in your bottle with an infinite number of wishes. That's not free will. Free will is your ability to make a choice from among the choices that you see in front of you. Now, you may be in a situation, and there may be 100 things that you could do, 100 different choices you could make in that situation, but you may only be aware of 20 of them, because there's a lot of choices that we have that we just aren't in our awareness. You have free will means you can make a choice between those 20. That's what your free will means to you. Those things that you know about, you can pick any one of those that you want as far as how you react to something or what you're going to do next. So free will isn't anything more than you get to choose from the choices that you are aware of. So it's nothing. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Tom. Why then, to go back to what you said earlier, why would a move towards self-centered, serving oneself, lead to a malice? So in other words, there's free will is not necessarily me just looking out for myself, but doing great harm to others that is not. To use the word, it's purely evil. There's a lot of people that commit acts that are not serving themselves; they're just purely destructive. So where does that land in register?
There's a long, slippery slope there. When it's about you, when your choices are all about you, what's good for me, and not concerning others, well, you eventually end up as a user of things and people, not a giver to things and people. It's about you. So you begin to use, as you meet people, you ask, what can they do for me? How can I use them? As you run into forests and animals, you think, how can I use them? And you are a user because you are at the center and everything is about you. And you don't really care too much about, those that you use. They're just there for your use. That typically ends up in what you're calling evil. That's the slope that you slide down. So even though you may, get to a point where your evil is now, you have the power to damage, maybe millions of people all at the same time because you're some ruthless dictator that can do that sort of thing. You got there through fear, self-centeredness. That's the slope at which gets you to that point where you are a user of things. Okay, but getting back to Scott's question is, okay, you have this free will and that's all your free will is. So the question is, well, if we have this free will, why doesn't Source make this a happier place? Why does Source have us in this bind where we have to grow up through this torturous process of getting rid of our fear and seeing a bigger picture? That's because it can't do anything else. There's no way that it can make it any easier for you. It's only effective. You can only grow up and evolve the quality of your consciousness if you make better choices. If you make the choice toward love rather than the choice toward fear, you have to do it. It can't be made for you. And it really can't even be made easier for you. Because if the Source came down to you and said, okay, Scott, listen, I'm going to explain to you how this reality works. That'll make it a lot easier for you. You would get that information at the intellectual level. The intellectual level is not where you have to grow. Growth only takes place at the being level, at the core of you, not in your intellect. So you can read all the holy books in the world, and you can study all the theology and all the My Big Toe and everything else that's high and lofty. But if you don't internalize that at your being level, you haven't grown up a bit. So we have to make those choices and grow up from the inside out. It's nothing that can be given to us. And what's given to us in the intellect, we tend to just twist and use and put it into our own form, make it adjust to our own beliefs and our own attitudes. And that's not really helpful. But the system does try to help you grow up as much as it can without conflicting with your own free will. You see, you have to make the choices. It can't help you, but it can nudge you. It can put you maybe in an environment where your lessons are lessons that's maybe a little easier for you to learn, or if it thinks you're up for bigger challenges, it can put you in an environment where the challenges are big because it thinks you've got what it takes to make those big to meet those big challenges. It can do those sorts of things. And it does to a lot of people. Sometimes people have, this experience of being one with the Source. A lot of people have NDEs, have that experience. It's the near-death experience. I don't know, maybe 10% of the people with near-death experiences have that become, they move to the light, become one with the light, and they have that kind of experience. That's an experience given to them by Source just to help wake them up, show them what life and reality is all about. And many of us get similar kinds of things that are less dramatic all the time. Where just little things happen in our day, and they just tell us that reality is bigger than the physical, and that we have significant choices here. And that's how the system helps us. But it can't help us by making choices for us or making our choices any easier, because then we don't learn. That's like children don't learn as long as their parents do everything for them.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but I do maybe it's your ideas about, like, I live in Omaha, Nebraska right now, a home of Warren Buffett, who talks about having people ask him, where do you attribute your success? He said, well, first of all, I won the ovarian lottery. He was born in America as a white male in a loving household and so forth. And that, of course, allowed him to a freer range of choices to make. I'm wondering, in your understanding, how do you contrast that with somebody who may have grown up and from the earliest age was abused sexually as a child, perhaps, and you grew up from the day, earliest memories formed by an abusive relationship? How does that work within your framework?
Okay, well, it works in several ways. Is why that comes about. One is just like Warren said, he won the ovarian lottery. Some of it is just chance. In this interaction among the 7.5 billion of us that interact on this planet, just a lot of stuff happens. Anytime anybody does anything, makes a choice, it tends to affect other people. And it's just the way it is. So sometimes you're in a situation where, you're in a real bad situation, a very tight situation, because that's just the way it works out. You're working at your job, you're doing very well, but the company goes under and now you're out on the street. Well, that's just life. It gives us challenges. It gives us opportunities to make choices, which is actually good for us, because if life was very predictable, we wouldn't nearly grow as fast with the choices. Life would be something we do with our intellect, and we wouldn't have to really approach it with our being level. We could just think our way through it because it was all so easy. So we get these choices and they're thrown at us and we have to deal with them. That's kind of the way life works. Now, another point is that you can learn, you can grow up in any situation. There's always choices that you have. Nobody's in a situation where they have no choices. You always have choices. And for a very extreme version of that, let me think I can think the guy. He wrote a book, Viktor Frankl, that's his name. Viktor Frankl, okay, he was a war prisoner. He lost his family, his children, his wife were all killed, in death camps. He was badly treated in those death camps. He was tortured. He had all the nasty things that happened. Barely survived the experience himself. But while he was there undergoing that kind of pain and torture, he wasn't blaming other people. He wasn't sinking into, woe is me. How could this happen to me? How unfair it was. He wasn't devolving into ego or into fear. He came out of that experience with a bigger understanding about how, people work and what they are and how you need to grow. So he took that, if you think of an experience that's really hard to grow in, one that's really easy to turn to fear and to self-centeredness and to hate in, he was in it. But he still had choices to think about it in a different way, and he did. Well, if you grow up in a family and your parents are both crack addicts, and you live in poverty and don't know where your next meal's coming from, you still have choices. Now, your choices aren't as easy, perhaps. You have harder choices, but the choices, they're just different. But you can still make choices, and that's just part of this experience. We have experiences. We have lots of experience. If you had just one life to live, if you only had one experience packet here, you might say, well, that guy grows up in a crack house. That's really unfortunate. He took a bad draw, that time. And it's kind of unfair that he gets that and somebody else grows up, like Warren Buffett did, with all the advantages. But we don't just have one shot at that. We get to do this again and again, and sometimes we end up where the choices are tough. Sometimes we end up where the choices are easy. But overall, we can evolve ourselves and grow up in all and any of those situations. It's just what we do with what we get. So yeah, the cards get dealt, and sometimes that's just random. If the shuffler who shuffles it is honest, then we can get some bad cards sometimes. But it's not so much what happens; it's how we deal with it is what's important. So and sometimes you have things. Well, what about who would want to incarnate into a back in the 70s it was Biafra, I think, where the children all had these bloated bellies from starvation. Nobody had anything to eat. Why would you want to be born there? You weren't going to live more than about 10 years if you were lucky, and probably not that long. But if you looked at those people, I saw the videos like probably you did at those times, you found children hanging to their moms and moms hugging those children. And when the mom got something to eat, she shared. And when those children got something to eat, they shared. And there really was a lot of love and caring in that situation. Yes, it was horrible, but you see, you have choices to make. And even if your life is only going to last 10 years or 20 years, or only if you don't expect yourself or your children to live very long, there still can be love and caring and growth, and you can make good choices. So even in the most horrendous, difficult situation, there are, love can still exist there. Caring and good choice is still there. So it's not like those are just throwaway experiences. It doesn't matter that much what happens. It really doesn't matter. If you lose your job, and your wife leaves you and your children don't like you, well, stuff happens. That's not the point. The point is, how are you going to deal with it? If you deal with it by thinking into depression and self-pity, that's going the wrong direction. That's not evolution. If you deal with it, with love and with caring and by growing up and becoming better, then great. That's it. So it's not so much where you are in the scale. It's not so much what happens. It's wherever you are and however it happens. What do you do with it? How do you deal with it? And that is available to everybody in every situation. So that's why Scott, it's not such an awful thing that we have this horrible world that we live in. We look at it and we say, why does this place suck? There's so much greed, there's so much envy, there's so much hate and nastiness in this world. Well, that world reflects us. It's just a reflection of the quality of the consciousness of the people that live in it. That's who we are. That's the way we are. And it's not that the institutions are to blame. It's not the governments and the corporations. Yes, they're greedy and they're nasty and they take advantage of people. But if we changed, if we the people grew up, they'd change automatically. They're just a reflection of us. So, changing those organizations to be kinder and gentler is just symptomatic relief. It doesn't touch the source. The source is consciousness quality. So it can't be really made any easier for us, or it can't be made any better. We've got our free will. Stuff happens. We get to deal with it. That's why we're here. We're here to grow up, to become love. That's our point of our existence. So it's not a matter of, couldn't they make this a little easier? This place is really tough. It just is what it is. And it's that way because that's what we made it. So no sense grousing about that. Might as well start seeing how we can, fix ourselves, because we can't fix it. All we can fix is us. So we fix ourselves, and when we fix ourselves, all that nasty stuff really becomes irrelevant. It's not that important anymore. It's just stuff you have to live with.
It's an interesting question. The Catholic Church actually teaches poverty as an evangelical counsel. Like you're better off being poor than wealthy. And I was wondering, but our modern society is constantly geared toward improving conditions, material conditions, and raising the quality of life. So there, from the standpoint of entropy and consciousness, there seems to be some kind of conflict, like how in using your thought process and your thought system as a way of constructing a better society. Is it advisable that we all strive for simplicity and poverty, or ought we to enjoy the good things the world has to offer? And it seems to me inside human society, it's hard to draw the line between creating better conditions. I mean, I know that Christianity struggles with this all the time. We want the world to be better. We want to give of ourselves, but we should be taking less. So when it comes to making schools, making communities, making families, where do you draw that kind of line?
Okay, well, there's really no fundamental difference between the poverty and the wealth. It's just a different set of choices. But each set of choices has its own easy parts and bad points. When you are wealthy, you can wreak havoc on a whole lot of people. If you are poor, if you're poor, you can't affect many. You can maybe holler at your wife and kick the dog, but that's about as much evil as you can do in the world because you don't have any power. So those are just differences. But when you're poor, now you don't have much, and you may be tempted, like in Elnes, to steal some bread, to help feed your sister and her baby. Whereas if you're rich, you don't have that problem. So they just have different sets of problems, different sets of choices of things they can do. Now, the idea that poverty is somehow ennobling, you see, is really the wrong idea, because it's going at it from the wrong point, in the wrong direction. What it says is poverty, is a place where I'm back to simple, and I'm not so wound up in the complex world. I'm not constantly on the treadmill anymore, so I have more time to think about big things. But you see, the problem there is if you embrace poverty because you think poverty is a good thing to embrace because that's where life is simpler and you can think big thoughts, all that's coming from the intellect. That's all your intellect trying to act the way you think you should act. You get no points for that. Acting, gets you no gold stars, next to your name. Being gives you the gold stars, and you can get those gold stars in being whether you're rich or whether you're poor. So being rich or poor is really irrelevant. Doesn't matter. It's how do you deal with what you have to deal with in either condition that really matters. And if you think that by simplifying your life so you can think big thoughts, if that comes out of an intellectual idea that that would be a good thing to do, that's not necessarily going to help you grow up at all unless you actually think those big thoughts and change yourself through thinking them. If you become different, you get rid of some fear, get rid of some ego, get rid of your beliefs, and become more loving, become more caring. Now, that takes you someplace, but you can do that rich or poor. You don't need simplicity to do that. You can do that anywhere. It's just how do you deal with the things you have to deal with is important. Whether you deal with them in poverty or deal with them, in luxury, really doesn't make any difference. It's how you deal with them and why you're doing it. It's your intent is the key here, not the outcome. Really, it's just the intent. It's not how many poor people do you feed. It's what your intent is in feeding those poor people. What are you learning? How are you growing from that? Is that a giving act or is it an ego act? Either act will maybe it end you up, helping feed poor people. But one will actually help you grow up and the other one won't. So I don't think it matters. I don't think going toward asceticism and giving up everything, living in a cave and making your life as simple as possible. Yes, that'll allow you in your mind and maybe in your spirit to grow some ways, but it also restricts you from growing because it limits the experiences that you have to a certain set of experiences that aren't as valuable. This diversity thing is good for us. We need to experience all sorts of stuff from all sorts of angles, and just being poor isn't going to help us. Just being rich isn't going to help us. Neither one will do us any good if we don't actually change who we are and grow up.
Yeah, I think about in the Christian tradition, the calling in life, and some people can make that overly precise what your calling is. But to me, it's about we all have a certain way of being in the world that brings us more fully alive than perhaps a different person. I love theology and I love science. You get on both of those things, but I know plenty of people who hate both of them and are perfectly loving people, and they have no business dealing with theology and science, and have no business dealing with what brings them alive in the world. And so, to me, the relationship of wealth and poverty really it's really more what resources do you have to fulfill your particular calling in life, and are you using the resources you have to do that, or are the resources you have blocking you from that? So I think that's where it gets tricky. Like Jesus says, it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And I think what he's getting at there is that the more we have he's not anti-wealth, but he is saying have a healthy dose of suspicion. Like, is your wealth causing you not to follow a sense of call because you protect what you've got?
Yes. Yeah. There was a Sufi tale about that I always liked and related to, and that was that a Sufi master was taking his own disciples to meet his own guru, his own master, and they were ascetics. They were living in poverty, but when they went to meet the master's master, the master was living in opulence. He had servants. He had this magnificent home. And, of course, afterwards they said, well, how can he live like that? Isn't that decadent? And their master told him, well, he can live in splendor because he cares nothing for it. We live in poverty because we care nothing for it. So if you're in opulence, but you still aren't, the opulence isn't in your ego. It's not how you define your life. It's not where your reality. It's not where meaning and significance is for you. Then it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's only when the opulence now pushes out any thoughts of stuff that's important, that's really important. Does it become a problem? So as long as the master, cared nothing for the opulence, he could have all the opulence he needed, and it wasn't a problem. And because it's easy to care nothing for poverty, it's to be completely disassociated from your poverty and care nothing for it. Well, that's pretty easy. So that's why people who are who are starting out on a spiritual path often go to simplicity and poverty, at least in olden times, because that was easy. It's a lot harder to do it on the other end, but that's a Sufi tale that always it made me chuckle when I read it, and I got the message, the truth of that.
We are in. I'm agreeing with you, and I think wealth is perfectly appropriate. So I'm not a class warrior or anything like that. But I'll say we're having this conversation in the middle of our church stewardship campaign, and you have people who will say, "I'm unaffected by wealth. It's not a trip." And then you ask, "Okay, well, why are you putting your money where your mouth is?"
Yep.
Oh, yeah. You're asking too much.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we generally have a much higher opinion of ourselves than actually would bear out if we were able to measure it accurately. That's just kind of the way we are. We all think that we are pretty highly evolved people. Really, we know the answers. If we could just get everybody else to do what we want, life would be so good. That's ego.
Tom, can I steer us in another direction here?
Please do.
Not that all of this stuff is amazingly interesting to me. I can maybe again, I'm coming from more of a confessional Catholic worldview, but among the things that I think really do overlap between your description of the larger consciousness system, speaking of the matrix in particular, and the angelology, spiritualism, there are definitely these entities out there. There are, like you referred to them as gatekeepers and entities and teachers, and you threw the word guides out before. The philosophy, medieval philosophy, and the church, the Christian churches, I think, have always sort of ranked the angels in terms of functional purpose. And they have hierarchies, they have grades, and they're each assigned to do different things. In your experience in the matrix, so to speak, or in the larger consciousness system, have you found such a similar specialization or breaking into ranks and such things?
No, I haven't found that. I would kind of guess that breaking down into that ranks, and this kind of non-physical being outranks that one, and these two work for this other one, and giving a hierarchical association. That's more of taking a metaphor of her eyes are blue as the deep blue sea, and trying to figure out which sea and what time of day, and what was the composition of the water. I think that's intellect building structure under a metaphor that is helpful. I call those things tools. It can be helpful to help people talk about things, and it defines things, and it defines structures, and it defines what's more fundamental and what's not. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's a tool set. It's sort of like the chakras. In Hindu we have these chakras. They're not fundamental. There are no really, chakras don't really exist, but they're a way of looking at the information such that you can break it up into pieces, and you relate pieces to the body, because then people can relate to it more easily, and you define them and you give them meanings, and that's helpful. All of that is helpful. It doesn't have to be fundamental to be helpful. I just call those tools. We can make up tools. The way I look at it is that each one of these, we have two classes really of kind of the beings we can deal with that are non-physical. One is other individuated units of consciousness like us, or other souls, other beings, right? There are other beings, and all of them aren't here in a physical body. There are those that would be non-physical to us, and they are just sort of like us. There are other souls, individuated units of consciousness that exist, and we can interact with those because we're consciousness in this system, they're consciousness in this system, and all consciousness is netted. We're all connected to each other, which is one of the things you learn when you become one with that light. We're all connected to each other. So there's that. Now the other thing is you have this larger consciousness system that really does try to help us grow up. Okay? Just as the other Eric said, that, his idea of God was that he is loved. It is that thing. And indeed, that's true. We are helped. The system helps us however it can. And I call guides and angels, because people have experiences. They have experiences of angels. They have experiences of guides. They interact with non-physical beings that give them information, that help them. This is very usual. It's not like that's a rare thing. Lots of people do this. Not just children and their imaginary friends, but all of us. I do this. I have non-physical friends. Some of them have been my friends for 50 years. Longer, 60 years had been my friends. And I interact with them. But I see all of this as an individual interface with the larger consciousness system. Okay, this is interaction with Source, if you will. Source wants to help us, and Source will give us a connection, an interface to it, a personal interface. And that interface, you could call it a guide, or if you come from a different set of metaphors, you may call it an angel. You see, it's just a different set of metaphors. That is now different. Those two things are different. So it could be just another soul, or it could be the system interacting with you. Now, the system will interact with you in any way that helps you take in the information or helps you make the connection. So if what you're into is Catholicism, then you may see, the Virgin Mary, or you may see angels, or you may see anything else that's out of the metaphors in that system. If you are, say, Eastern, and it's ancestor kind of worship, then it would be your great-grandparent, or your parent, or your ancestors would be those people you were communicating with. Or, if you are none of those, if you are, you don't have any of those kinds of metaphors, it may just be a wise guru, or just a being of knowledge and a wealth of wisdom and whatever that you interact with. So you will visualize it. The system will contact you in any form that actually helps it help you. It could be your mother who just died last week. It could be, Uncle Fred who died, 50 years ago. It could be anyone that you respect, that you will kind of take information from and think about it. And that's how the system will interact with you, because if it showed up as a three-headed talking chicken, you wouldn't pay any attention to it. You'd say, that's ridiculous. And you'd toss it away. Right.
Good.
Yeah. Or maybe a burning bush, if it turned out to be a burning bush, you might run away rather than stay and have a conversation. So it tends to interact with people however it makes sense for those people, for that interaction to take place. And the system does that with all of us who are interested. It doesn't necessarily talk to everybody, because some people won't get anything from it. They'll just push it away. What was that? It's my, I'm just talking to myself. I'm wasting my time here, and it wouldn't give it any credence. Wouldn't really consider what's being given to them. So those people really don't have an interface because they don't want one. But if you want one and you can use one, then you've got one. So here the system reaches out to everybody and gives them an interface, something that you can connect with personally, something with a sense of humor, something that has a personality, something that is familiar enough for you to learn from or talk to. So that's what I would say. So there's no hierarchy in either of those. The system will reach out to anybody and everybody who has a need, and the other souls that we might interact with, they're just like interacting with people on the street. That interaction is not hierarchical either. Some of them are knowledgeable and wise, and some of them know even less than what we know. It's just kind of a random match there. But no, I don't see any kind of hierarchical sense of things. But I see that tendency to do that is a tendency to take information, break it into a form that's easy for people to understand. You kind of slice it and dice it and put it into structures, and then you can talk to people about it. Otherwise, it's too abstract for a conversation. So that's why we have, I think, hierarchies in angels, and why we have hierarchy, or why we have 7 chakras and these other structures that we make up as tools just to help us have a conversation, to help us talk about it, to help us personally interact with it, because we humans have a hard time interacting with things that aren't concrete. So we make up concrete things, we make up metaphors, and then we interact with those because the basic idea is really very abstract. This idea of source is a very abstract thing, and most people can't deal with it at that level.
It's funny because we were, talking about all this. I did a meditation a while back with the intent of like connecting with my guide, because my jury's still out for me as to what those are all about. And in meditating, I fell asleep and I had a dream, and it was the only thing I remember about the dream was that Will Ferrell was in it. And I woke up and I thought, oh, that was garbage. I didn't get anything out of it. And I thought, well, no. Maybe Will Ferrell's my spirit guide is it. And it kind of makes sense because, I love stupid humor. And it's a voice I can talk to. But when my mom and I talk about stuff like this, what I wonder is, I don't know that when I'm addressing, Will or whatever, I don't know that is that actually a separate non-physical being, or is that just me communicating to a different part of me?
Well, you are consciousness, okay? And I'm not sure what you mean when you're talking to Will, but if you're having an interaction, say with something that, even if you think it's maybe a daydream or it's a night dream, doesn't matter. If you're doing that, then the question to ask isn't who is that and was that, quote, real? The question to ask is, was that useful? Did I learn something from that? Is that significant to me in any way? Is there anything I can learn from that? That's the real question. The is it real is a question that comes out of our own ego. We want to vet the source to know whether we should believe it or not. But we shouldn't believe anything, you see. We should be skeptical about everything. The question to ask is, was that useful? So it could have been just the larger consciousness system interacting with you, and Farrell was just a good tool to use, It could have just been your imagination because you were thinking about a Will Ferrell movie that you had seen recently, whatever. It doesn't matter. One of them isn't like, oh, well, one's the truth and the other one is nonsense. It's not like that. They're all just information. And the question is, how useful is it? What did I get from that? And don't really care about where it comes from. Because that's one of the interesting things about existence. You never get to know the source. You get information, but the source is always hidden. Sources cannot transmit themselves. They can only transmit information. You get the information or the data. You have to translate it into your own terms, into your own metaphors. So that's all you ever get to see. No data comes with a little tag on it that says, oh, this is from the God, this is from the larger conscious system, this is from an angel, this is from a guide. You don't get that. Or this is from a daydream, or this is from your own imagination, or this is from your higher self. You'll never get a tag that explains source. All you get is information. Is it helpful or is it not? And if you think about it, if it's not helpful, it doesn't matter where it comes from. If it's not something you can use, it's not something you can use. Even if it came directly from God himself. If you can't use it, you can't use it, right? So it's not useful to you. And if it is useful to you, it really doesn't matter where it comes from either. Use it, you see? So we kind of get this sense of what's real and what's not and just kind of turn that on its head and say, well, what's useful and what's not? The realness thing is really a trick. It's one of those things that our ego latches onto because we don't want to make choices ourselves. We want the information vetted so we don't have to actually figure it out on our own. We want somebody to tell us, oh, this guy had 3 Ph.D s. Listen to whatever he says and believe it because he's smart. And this guy doesn't know anything, so throw all that away. Well, that just makes us lazy. We need to listen to both of those and decide for ourselves which one has value to us.
Well, Eric has a Ph.D. and I never listen to him. So
there you go.
He'll listen to his spirit guide more than me. So.
Yeah.
But I think that's really well said, and I relate to that very strongly, Tom. And I think about it like in my own meditative disciplines. I've made a rule for myself that I have a thought that comes in sideways, and I start wondering, well, is this from source or not? To push aside that question and just treat it as if it is for the sake of the meditation, realizing in the end I can always make up my own mind about whether I think that came from source or not. And I also apply your own standard, like, is this, regardless of whether you can know that, was this useful to you? Where I run into where it gets more one more click of refinement is to get information that I think may come from source, and I say, well, regardless, then would you make that same decision? I mean, if you think it came from source, would you still make that same decision if it was proved that it was just in your mind? And if I say, well, yes, it would, then I'll absolutely go in that direction. Yeah. But if I say, no, I wouldn't make that decision if I weren't convinced, then I'd say, well, wait a minute, is that really from source? And if I still think maybe it was, then I need more proof. I need that thought to circle around again, and not going to take actions based on what I think comes from the source without that I wouldn't make in my logical mind unless there's a hell of a lot of proof.
Exactly. See, the thing is that you can't. Otherwise, you give away your free will. You see, if you do things because somebody who's knowledgeable tells you to, because they're smarter than you are, well, now you're not making that choice. You're just following somebody's direction. If you're not making choices, you're giving up your free will to somebody else to make your choices for you. And if you do that, you can't grow up. You can only grow up through making choices. So that's why it doesn't matter whether it's source or not. It doesn't matter where that information comes from. You have to make the choice. And it has to be your choice, or it's not really a valuable exercise. It's only a valuable exercise if you're making the choice. So, if God talks to you directly and he says, I'm God and you need to pay attention to me, here's what I want you to do, you see, well, you have to think about that. And if that's something that you think would be what you would do and what you'd want to do, well, then you do it. But if you think about it and say, I don't think so, that's not really my choice to do that, then don't do that. You have to make the choice, and then you get, to evolve or de-evolve based on, the quality of your choices. And that's the way it should be. But doing things because somebody else tells you to, and you think they're smarter than you are, they know more than you, or they have a higher rank than you, is not really a good idea. You need to do things because you think it's right. And that's your free will, and that's your, you should never give that away to anybody else, even God. You need to make your own choices.
Can I make a taped confession here?
I'm all ears.
So in my meditative practice, part of it is increasingly turning my will over to that source, opening my willingness to hear from that source. But I will say I'm convinced now there are times where I have become absolutely, I'm from this to this, and I'm absolutely willing to hear from source, and willing to go left if I think it's go left, or willing to go right if it's go right. And I hear nothing, and I come back the next day, and I'm still that way. I'm trying to figure out a direction, and nothing's coming. Even then, I get upset, like, wait a minute, I've given my will over here in this moment, and I swear to you, what happens is I eventually hear, like, would you just make your frickin' choice?
Exactly.
Dare to make a mistake sometimes too. By the way, we can always correct for that, yes. But it's like, I'm not trying to make you God, I'm trying to make you Eric Elnes. And you are distinct. We are the same, but also there's something about you that is unique and distinct, and at least on this level has to be, and it's a right thing. So be Eric Elnes, don't be God.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Because see, even if God wanted to give you an instruction, he wouldn't give you an instruction, because otherwise he's just using you. Now, you see, it's not love on his part. He's using you to do something, and we don't get used like that. We have to grow up. We have to make the choice. And yes, I would agree with you. That's what growing up does for you. You become more and more open, more and more apart, and pretty soon you do live in this expanded space of being connected to Source all the time. It's not like you meditate, you live a meditation. You become that, and that's who and what you are. But you still have to take responsibility for your choices. Don't expect somebody to tell you, should I do this, should I do that? And people get into that. They can't, they can't do anything unless they consult, their astrologer or, do something else, the I Ching or some other thing that's going to tell them what to do. This inability to take responsibility for your choices, to say, well, I'm just giving myself up to Source. I want to do your work. Well, the only way you can do that work is by growing yourself up, and the only way you can do that is by making your own choices. And no being of real value and understanding will try to manipulate you and tell you what to do. Just like when we, raise our own children, we get to the point when they grow old enough, we have to stop telling them what to do. We have to start giving them guidance and stop giving them answers. Otherwise, we get in the way of their growth. Well, it's the same with us. So yeah, that's the way it is. I went through that too. You get to a point where you say, all right, what now? Where am I going? And the answer always is your choice. You have to make that choice. I'm not telling you what to do. It's just the way it is. And then you realize, yeah, that's the way it has to be. I'm giving my free will up. No value.
I definitely, though, think that there are times when it is like reaching out to a very wise person, who isn't going to just tell you everything you need to know, but there's times where you authentically want to hear that advice, and that advice, I think it comes regularly.
It does. It's available to anyone, and whether it's your angel or your guide or just talking, with a direct line, to the man upstairs, or however you want to put your metaphors together for it, it really doesn't matter. But it's available to everybody to get that source. Yeah, I've been interacting with the same interface to the system with the same individuals for many, many years, and I've never gotten any bad advice. I've never gotten any information that turned out to be wrong, but they never tell me what to do. That's just not the way it works.
Wow. That's really good.
Like giving a painting. There's a beautiful geography. You decide where you're going to go in that geography, but maybe you'll see a little bit more of the geography to make that choice than you did before. I have a question. Your three-headed chicken reminded me, actually, what's the role of humor is always kind of an interesting fascination that it seems to be part of the graciousness and goodwill of whatever or whoever created us. But do you see a specific role of humor in all this meaning in it, or is it just we laugh and it means nothing?
No, it's humor is a very valuable tool for us. Humor is what keeps us from being so serious all the time. If we're serious all the time, we very quickly get wadded up in our own plan. We tend to overthink things. We tend to create problems that aren't even there, and that's often from our overthinking, our overseriousness. It's really helpful to just lighten up and laugh, to not take things seriously. This life ought to be fun. Our life ought to be enjoyable. It ought to be even the challenges that are tough. Pretty soon you start to see them as it's like you're in this game, right? And this is your quest. This is your challenge. Can you deal with this and deal with it well? And even if it hurts and it comes with a lot of pain, it's kind of a neat thing to do. It's a challenge. You can find some fun in it, in the sense that, okay, you've got this challenge to deal with, and dealing with it well will leave you in an optimum position. Dealing with it poorly will leave you in a terrible position, and you have no idea how to approach it. So you just have to have some sense of humor. You have to approach it lightly. Don't sit down and try to figure it all out in your head or whatever. Just do it. Enter into it. Engage. Try to make good choices one at a time and see what happens. That kind of an attitude. And as you make mistakes and you get a slap, then well, take a laugh at that. Don't take it too seriously. Yeah, I think humor is essential. Goodness, we'd all be depressed if it wasn't for humor. We'd all have ourselves, wadded up in an intellectual ball, not knowing what to do next if it wasn't for humor. It's an essential part of our psyche that keeps us from self-destructing.
Well, good. I'm going to see John Cleese narrate the Monty Python and the Holy Grail at the Orpheum Theater. but I think there's something. I tend to trust. There's a lot of people who claim to be spiritual in this world, and so forth. And I think people who are devoid of humor, I rarely trust. Mm-hmm. And even looking back at my own, I had a couple of kind of road to Damascus mystical experiences in my life. One was actually just a year ago, August, and when that happened, it was everything you just talked about, earlier about the oneness and no separation and everything, and just pure love. It was so beautiful, it was so intensely beautiful that I broke down crying at first. I mean, there was no words to describe it. In fact, I tried to talk and I couldn't. It was just too much. It was too beyond any kind of words. And then I broke out hysterically laughing because I realized here I am. I make my living on teaching spiritual stuff, and I can't even describe with any kind of words that which I think is most real.
Right.
It just cracked me up in the middle of this highly spiritual experience.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you need to laugh just to break the tension,
And maybe it's a laugh because some of the laugh is at when the distance between something that's so utterly profound and where we are is so great that it's funny.
Yes, exactly. Once you have a big picture of things, you have to laugh. We are very funny people. Humans are very, very funny creatures, and you have to laugh at yourself and laugh at all of us as we go through these struggles here. Yeah, and sometimes, like you say, laughter is about the only way that you can get out of the tension of something that is enormous.
So do you think laughter and humor is something that's simply a part of us and our experience of something that's divine or higher or our source, or do you think that actually goes all the way back to the source? I mean, does the source?
That's a good question.
Well, I think it's a part of us. It's also a part of the source. My guides all have a good sense of humor. It's a part of it's just a part of being conscious. Consciousness, that's one of the expressions of consciousness is joy and humor and just seeing the light side of things, not getting too serious. And like I was saying earlier, I think it's a part of consciousness that's there because it's absolutely necessary, or we drive ourselves nuts with our preoccupations and our trying to overthink everything. Just finding that light side and laughing is a therapy all to itself. So I think it's an innate part of our consciousness that is essential. Consciousness evolved. Those consciousnesses that didn't have that didn't make it. They didn't evolve because they all got so tightly wound around their own axles that you lose perspective, and now your ability to make good choices kind of goes away. So those that had this innate ability to just throw their hands up and have a good laugh when things get so complex that they don't have any idea what's going on, well, then you just laugh at it. Well, that laugh is almost like a reboot. It sets you back to you can get a new perspective now instead of that wadded up perspective that you had.
Eric C. has brought up the question of evil a couple times in this conversation. I think that the way evil works is to build itself up to be way bigger and more powerful than it actually is. And so sometimes humor actually bursts the balloon of that illusion.
Yes, I think that is true. The thing that I guess evil hates most is to be laughed at.
I have a direct, very recent story that goes with it. I was in Portland and I'd just done a video shoot all day and had gotten done. I'm in a hotel and I'm starting to have a question about, okay, there's two directions I need to go. Which one's going to help me grow up more? I wasn't afraid I was going to make a wrong decision, but which one was going to help me grow up more? And so it was literally kind of keeping me awake, and I was trying to get to sleep, and I'm struggling with it. And I kind of go to the bathroom to put some water on my face, and I walk back in, and I realize that the entire time on the TV is a movie starring Will Ferrell. And I just busted out laughing because just the irony of the fact that this, funny little spirit guide was on there, it made me laugh so hard that suddenly that decision I was trying to make became really a very small, insignificant thing. My stress just fell off with that.
And probably became easier to make the decision. The decisions probably got a lot clearer at the same time. Yeah, we get wadded up with our analysis, and we just need to let that go. Laughing's the way to do it.
Probably play, too, that serves a similar function.
What does?
Play.
Yes.
Yeah.
Playing games, playing...
Play is just people being spontaneously who they are. Children are good at it because they're not trying to be anybody else. But then the older you get, the more you're taking on image and you're taking on doing what you're supposed to and being polite and obeying all the rules of our culture, and that kind of makes us not so spontaneous anymore. But it's just a spontaneous expression of who we are is what play is about. I mean, playing can be anything. For some people, what is hard work and labor is play for somebody else. It just depends on your intent as you do it. This has been play, As far as I'm concerned, I've been playing all night. This is the kind of thing I enjoy. This is a good conversation. I'm a scientist. That's where I come from, physicist, and that's my background, and that's where my personality probably comes out of that same thing. I tend to be very exceptionally left brain and very exceptionally right brain all at the same time. So I had to learn that left brain stuff. I came in right brain, but I needed to learn all that left brain stuff in order to do what I had to do here. And it surprised me to no end as I was working this growing up and understanding about consciousness. I started from a physicist viewpoint. The typical scientific viewpoint is that if you can't measure it, it's not important. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And if it exists, it's irrelevant because you can't measure it. That's the way science views the world. And then my world got opened up a little bit. I did some transcendental meditation, found out I could do things that were impossible. And that led to one thing to another, and I started working with Bob Monroe in his lab, and eventually my attitude that all the people who are committed to religion are just fooling themselves and don't know what they're doing. Again, one of these measurement problems for me. I changed that attitude and I said, well, a lot of the things I'm figuring out for myself have been figured out thousands and thousands of years ago, by people who mostly started religions. And that the fundamental truths in religion are just fundamentally what I'm finding out to be true, as I understand consciousness and conscious evolution and my own evolution. So that was a big aha moment, which made me laugh. I had got a real good laugh out of that because this arrogance that I had toward people of faith, faith is nonsense. And I find out that they actually knew a whole lot more about the fundamentals of life and reality than I did. And I'm a physicist studying reality, but they were quite a bit ahead of me in understanding actually reality and how it works and what's important. So that was a kind of an aha moment that occurred probably 40 years ago or so when I was doing this stuff. And then I didn't really see much difference, except I saw that there was lots of dogma and creed and belief stuff that really didn't make any difference. That was there. That's sort of like the chakras. That was there to slice and dice all the abstract ideas down to a level that average people could deal with them and make them more concrete. And that it just was a tool set that as long as you realize that the tools are tools and don't believe in the sacred tools, then tools are good. It's only when you get trapped into believing that the tools are something sacred and aren't just tools that you can start to learn, kind of wind down that twisty road into wondering, which sea was it that those blue eyes were supposed to look like? You diverge into details that are really not that meaningful. You're missing the big overall point, which is love. Love is the thing here. Caring, empathy, other, not self. That's important, and that's in most all the major religions and spiritual traditions. That's kind of the fundamental key there, and they all have that in common.
The Apostle Paul said, "I'm nothing without it."
No, I'm just. This has been great. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, just a quick I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts. It was Eric's experience that led me to, investigate I found more out about the double slit experiment, and there was a video that ended up you were talking after this one other video, and that's when it kind of connected for me. And then later I was introduced to, I guess I won't mention a specific name, but it's one of these teachers who says if you want it, the universe it gives it to you. It's just your negative talk that keeps you from it.
Yeah.
And I kind of then did my open-minded but skeptical test. Is this working for me? And is this, how does it? And there were so many people that were convinced that if I want it, the universe has given it to me. I just have to, become in alignment to it. And you said something at one point that made a lot of more sense to me, was that if you see something or if you want something, focusing on it it makes the probability of it higher. You're just affecting the probability of it, right, as opposed to that it's just naturally given to you.
Right. Yeah, it's part of the structure of how this reality is put together. Now, in my model, I see this as a virtual reality. Consciousness is the computer. The computer creates this reality for us to make choices in, because this is a place where choices count. There's consequences here in this particular reality. Otherwise, consciousness is is communicating and making choices, but it's like being in a big chat room. Just a whole bunch of conscious chatting with each other doesn't have a lot of consequence. It's really hard to grow up in that environment. So you need this virtual reality to give you a traction on feedback from your choices. So that's why we're here. Well, part of this virtual reality, the structure, the mechanics of what makes it work, turns out to give us the ability to modify future probability. This is a probabilistic simulation, which is part of what quantum mechanics tells us, that this is really a probabilistic world. And we can change future probability with our intent. That's how the placebo effect works. Placebo effect works because people have an intention. They think this medicine is going to make them better, and it does make them better. And it doesn't just make them think they're better, it really makes them better because now they have an intention for a positive outcome. Well, people have taken that fundamental fact of reality and turned it into the secret, with, how do you want a new Mercedes-Benz? Well, here's how you get one, you see. Well, yes, the system will modify probability because of your intent, but when you ask the system to work against itself, see, the system wants you to grow up, wants it to be about other, doesn't want it to be about ego, doesn't want it to be about your beliefs, doesn't want it to be about your fear. It wants you to grow up. And if all you're doing is serving your ego needs, I'm going to be a big guy driving down the street in my new Mercedes-Benz, and people will look up to me if I have this and that. If that's what you're doing, that's serving your ego. And now you're trying to get the system to serve your ego. System doesn't like to work against itself. Typically in those situations, either nothing happens or you get what you want along with a bunch of unintended consequences, which give you a good slap across the knuckles to let you know that this is, not what you're supposed to do in this reality, is, try to use the system for your own material gain. So that does work. It is the nature. It's how people heal with their minds. You can heal somebody with your mind because you can modify the probability. And it's just a few variables. One of them in it has to be, the intent has to be from the being level. Can't come out of your ego. If it comes out of your intellect, it's more like throwing a penny in a wishing well and making a wish. That's kind of an intellectual thing, and it doesn't carry much weight. But if it's really, truly out of an expression of how you feel, an expression of your empathy, of your caring, whatever, out of your being level, then it carries a lot of power. And if you can hold that focus clear and tightly for some time, that helps. Most people's minds are jibber-jabbering and going back and forth, and they don't really have much, continuity from one thought to another. Just thoughts are running through their head all the time. Well, that's just a lot of noise. So you need to get rid of all that noise and have a very clear, focused intent from the being level, and you can truly change a lot of things by modifying probability. But you can't, it's not a blank check. You can't just get whatever you want. You have to change the probability. If the probability is 1,000 to 1 that something that you want is going to happen, you may, if you're very good and talented, change that all the way down to 100 to 1. Well, that's 2 orders of magnitude. Wow, you're a powerful guy. But you're still not likely to get it because you started, it was just too hard to do. On the other hand, if it's about 50-50 and you're this powerful guy, well, it's amazing how good your luck is that things just fall your way, so often, so many times. That's why people who are positive, real positive, upbeat people, things just tend to happen to them that are positive. Stuff works out for them. People who are negative, woe is me, life sucks, the only luck I have is bad, that kind of thing. That kind of stuff happens to them. They're always the guy who gets there, a day late and $1 short. It just, nothing seems to work out for them. That's why. If you have a negative, the placebo effect works both ways. You have a negative intent, it makes that negative stuff happen. If you have fears, that fear helps those fears materialize into real stuff if you have them in your head. So that's part of the feedback we get here. Part of the process of us interacting with our reality is this idea that the quality of our thoughts produces the quality or lack thereof of our experience. So that's an important it's important kind of an important aspect to being in this reality frame is that we do modify it, and what we think does matter, how we feel does matter. And if we have a lot of hate and negativity, that pulls everybody around us down. That is a downer for the whole human race, actually for the whole planet. But if we're up and positive and have a lot of love and caring, that pulls everybody up around us. And,
well, Tom, on the question of the intent modifying future probability, I've been watching you and your work for a good, 5 or 6 years now, and you're hitting a level of activity and productivity that's kind of mind-boggling. And I'm wondering, you indicated back in Portland that what you see is it's all happening, it's all going to work out the way it's supposed to be. And I'm just wondering if your intense work schedule is something that you've factored into this. Is your own sort of hyper drive bringing about things as you want to see them at a pace faster than might have otherwise happened?
Oh, I don't know. I try, but who knows how effective I am. Again, taste the pudding later, and we'll see whether I'm making good decisions or bad ones. But I'm definitely busy. I've got more to do than I have time to do it in, but I guess a lot of people live like that. I'm looking for ways to have more time. I have other books I'd like to write, other things I'd like to offer. For one, my books only appeal to a certain minority of people because they're hard to read. They're very logical. The interest of how does reality work and what's the nature of of our existence is not really a hot topic on most people's minds. That's pretty minority interest. And I'd like to get that down into something that's more digestible for the average person. So, writing something that's simpler and less complex and maybe more video-ish, if you like, animation, other kinds of tools that will make this more available. I'd like to get into some of those ideas to increase the audience, but actually it's more increasing the access to the material. So I got a lot of things I'd like to do, and I don't have time for it. And I've got a book I've been writing in my head now for about 3 decades, and that's the Primal Male, Primal Female book. That's another big issue in our culture that creates so much dysfunction and so much damage that I want to address that because it's a really big, it's really a big problem. It's a big issue for a lot of people is who am I? What does it mean to be male or female in this relationship? And what's going on here? We have so much junk that's just part of our culture. What are we really, if you take all that cultural overlays, what are we as human beings? What's natural for us in terms of our gender and our relationship and so on? And that I've been working on, and I've got 20 or 30 pages of it outlined. It's sitting on my website that anybody can look at, but it needs to turn into a book sometime, and all I've been doing is learning more and collecting data, but eventually I need time for that. And I get 200 or 300 emails every day, and I feel like I need to answer all of those. So yes, I'm feeling the pressure of how do I deal with all of this, and I have to make some decisions about what's more important, and you can't do it all, and I'd like to do it all, but I just don't have that capacity to do it all. I'm 72, and I work more hours now than I did when I was punching the clock and getting paid as a professional. So it's I need to make some changes. I'm not quite sure what they are. That's some of the challenges that I have, decisions I need to make. Sometimes you have to let go of something important to do something else that's even more important, and that's a hard thing to do.
I like I think, when I started communicating with Keith, I like what you're saying about, I'm a video producer, and so, I think visually, and especially if you're going to be, in an environment where you're doing, basically videos have to be in very digestible things. And right. One of the points I was making is, I know yourself. For me, it was audiobooks is how I got, MBT. Great for when I was out skiing or hiking and things like that. But then, when I started going into the videos, I was like, well, shoot, they're 2 or 6 hours long. And to me, they're very relevant. I actually a lot of times listen to them as I'm winding down at the end of the night. But I also have had to tell my clients that the best information in the world is no good if people click out before they hear it.
Right.
And
that's exactly right.
Yeah, I've always felt like getting your kind of cores into some nice digestible bits would be a fantastic thing for spreading that message.
Right. I'd really like to do that. That's a very important thing. Yeah, I've got probably 500 plus videos sitting on YouTube, and most of them are at least an hour and a half. Some of them are 6 hours long. And it's just overwhelming. It's like if you have a specific thing you want to learn about, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. So it's just not user-friendly, and it needs to be more user-friendly. And I've got a couple of initiatives I'm working on, but it's really hard to do those initiatives and answer 200 emails at the same time.
Yeah.
Like they say about preachers, you know what it means when a preacher takes off his watch and puts it on the pulpit? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm not a preacher, but I get up and talk to groups now and again, and I do that. I take off my watch and I'll set it up there on the thing, and I never look at it because the material just has a life of its own, and you start connecting with the audience, and then it just goes on however it goes, and somebody's finally does this to me, like, it's been 4 hours and nobody's had a chance to go to the bathroom, you need to let us go. And I kind of wake up and see the little picture because I've been lost in the big picture.
Wow. Well,
it's been fun, guys. Have we done it? Any more questions or any more thoughts?
I feel like I'm pretty well. Most of the stuff that I wanted to find out, to ask all you gents, I think has been touched on. I think, but I know I feel really bad as you just laid out the problems you have with time, and here we just sucked up 2 of your precious hours to talk about this stuff.
This stuff's important. This is important stuff.
I think to me, what I really liked about this when the whole topic came up was that I've kind of played in both camps. I'm a meteorologist, cosmologist, and I'm a musician and a theologian and all that stuff. And I think that Eric and I have had really long conversations about theology and science, and obviously I've learned a lot about MBT and stuff like that. It's that there's so much to it that they share in common. There's so many things that maybe the right brain person might listen to what Tom's saying and say, that doesn't make sense, that's garbage, and then, and vice versa. And yet, really, it's the same thing. The same essential ingredients are in both ways of thinking.
Yeah. That is the case. Yeah, well, it's been fun. I've been recording this. I hope none of you mind if it ends up on YouTube as an audio recording, but I record everything because that's what makes, I guess that's just what I do. I record it all and I put it out there. This will be another 2 hours of audio, on my YouTube site. But still, it's there, and people will learn from this. The things we talk about are very much of interest to a lot of people. This is a Christian, culture that we live in. That's the dominant belief system in this culture. And to talk about things that are relevant to Christianity and my work and how it all fits together and that kind of stuff, that's important for people to hear that and have a source where they can listen to that. So, it's only the four of us sitting here having a conversation, but in 6 months from now, there will have been 40,000 people that have listened to this. So it serves a larger purpose. I mean, we're having fun. I'm having fun, but still, besides that, there are going to be a lot of people who have similar thoughts and ideas and concepts, and it really is nice for them to be able to find somebody talking about it, because most people are pretty lonely when they think big thoughts. Big thoughts aren't the kind of stuff you share much.
Yeah. Well, if you're foolish enough to have the word Eric Elnes associated with what you're doing, you go ahead and vote so.
Oh, yes.
I work with the Tri-Faith Initiative here in Omaha, so I'm a heretic in not just one religion, but 3.
That's an achievement.
Yeah, quite an achievement.
Thank you. It's been delightful.
Yeah, it's nice meeting you guys.
Yes, it's nice meeting both of you. I'm glad you could find the time to do this. It's really been fun.
I'd do this if they paid me. I'd do this all day long.
I do it all day long too. Anyway, but I don't get paid for it. But I do it anyhow. But then I'm retired. See, I have an advantage. I'm retired. I don't have to punch anybody's clock. I get to do what I want when I want to do it. I just never get to the end of my list.
Right.
Well, I will bear greetings to John Cleese tonight for you all. How's that?
Yeah, Will Ferrell and John Cleese.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. I'll be in touch with all of you, I'm sure, as the weeks go on.
Look forward to it.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks. Well, so long then.
Thanks now.
Here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.